Welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. I am your host, Christine, and I'm excited today because we have a returning guest. She was here back in September of 2021, which I had to look up and see because I'm wondering how long it's been, which was episode 43 for anyone that once we get into this wants to go back and listen. And now we'll be at about 170 for this episode, which is crazy. But before I'm already off and running, but I want to welcome Beth Santos, who is the recent author of Wonder Woman and also the founder of Wanderful. And we're here to talk about all of these things. So I can't wait to catch up with you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me back. I feel so honored that I made it into like the first third now of the first quarter, I guess, of podcast guests. And gosh, that was so long ago. We have so much to catch up on.
Yeah, it doesn't even seem like it's the like I don't even feel like the same people are sitting here, so it'll be like a whole new episode. I know we were just
Totally.
talking before we jumped on, you've had so many changes in your life that you're literally not the same person as then, but
I
right,
have split into like
yeah,
even more people since then.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Which is such a perfect segue because that is something that we're gonna talk about. But yeah, so I just wanted to set the stage. We are having this interview here on March 7th, and your book was just released on the 5th. This will air a little further into the future, but I want people to know like we're in big celebration mode here. So I'm really excited to be here for that with you.
Aw, thanks. No, it's funny because it's like a really busy week in some ways, and then it's also like the calm before the storm in other ways because I start traveling next week. So it's like it's really funny. Like on launch day, people are like, "Oh, what did you do?" And it's like, "Well, I went to some bookstores, and then like I went home." Like there wasn't, all the big stuff happens later. So it's a
Yeah.
really fun time to be like just checking in from home and talking to you.
Yeah, and it's also I don't know if you already just mentioned, but Women's History Month and International Women's Day is tomorrow. So this is definitely a time, and I have this slated to talk about, but where we can find ourselves really busy when this is the space that we're holding. So again, I'm just really happy
Yeah.
to have you here, and also I just wanted to kind of start our conversation by recognizing what a joy it's been to kind of witness this season of life that it seems like you've been in for the last couple of years, and to see just this like beautiful wave of recognition that has seemed to just be like flowing over, at least from the side that I'm sitting on. And I think it's just been so great. I just feel so excited to see it because in a way it feels like a nod to the work that so many of us are doing. Like when I see the recognition towards you, I realize that is, that's beginning to happen, and that this thing that we have really been, when I say we, all the women who've been working to champion and support other women in the tourism industry, this is like the moment I think so many of us have been waiting for. And when I see the light on you, I just know that light's spreading out towards everyone.
Oh my gosh, that's like one of the nicest things that anyone's ever said to me.
Oh,
That's really sweet. No, but well, and I very deeply appreciate that. And I think in some ways it's something that I think about a lot, being like running a women's travel community, but also running this community of content creators is, and we talk about this a lot, and I'm sure we'll get into many more things on this call, but I talk about it with my sales team a lot because when we have an event, for example, we run this conference for travel content creators. And I think every sponsor we get for this event, we're like opening the door for that sponsor to then work with the 500 people that are coming to the event. And I like take that very seriously, of not to be like, oh, I'm like the key to everyone's success. That's not true at all. But I do recognize that like when I bring a brand to our event, that creates an opportunity for exposure for all these other women. And in some ways it's like really, really stressful thinking about that, because you're like, we have to get everybody, and like we have to make this case for why this is so important. But in other ways, it feels really nice to be able to kind of do this work and to just spend so much time elevating other people who are doing amazing work too. So thank you. Sweet.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's like this, um, I can't think of the right word, but like this web weaving that I feel like we get to
Yeah.
do with some level of intentionality. And it's not, again, like not self-serving, right? It's like, man, if I could tie this knot over here,
Yeah.
I can see
Yeah.
how that's going to connect all these things.
Yeah.
And I just get to witness like what becomes after that. And not because
Yeah.
I'm some magic maker, but because that's just the space that I
Yeah.
am in and that I
Yeah.
love to be in.
Yeah. Totally.
Yes. I
Yeah.
feel like we have the same heart for that space. And the other thing I wanted to do is, not only mention that you have birthed this new book into the world, but you also just birthed a new human, which is also incredible. And we're going to talk about that too. But it's such a great, I just feel like so much is like coming to life literally in your space.
Mm.
And again, just I'm really excited to get to share some of that with our listeners today.
It is a year of creation. That is for sure.
Yeah, and
No
I'm sure
underestimating that.
yeah, I'm sure you had no idea when you were like mapping out the 5-year plan what was coming, but
No, not at all. Not even close. So, but that's one of like the tenets of travel that I feel like I'm always preaching, which is just you just got to roll with it. Like you just have to enjoy the ride and not expect your travels to take you any one way. They take you, you don't take them. Like you don't take a trip takes you. I don't know. That's kind of like I feel more and more like that. And I feel like my journey as a human has been more and more like that of just embrace whatever's being thrown at you and just keep moving.
yeah, oh, it's so good. Well, the first thing that I wanted to talk about, which maybe kind of falls under the category of showing up as you are, who you are, without trying to kind of manipulate yourself to match the energy or status of a room or a Zoom or whatever. Um, and like not always having to be 100% on, which is a space that I know, like probably right now, you're feeling that 100% on call. But you and I hopped on a Zoom a few years ago and we both like kind of landed in the Zoom. Our hair was wet because we just showered. We probably just like somehow managed to get our kids out of the space so that we could have the conversation. And I remember in my mind, like before that conversation, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting on this Zoom with Beth. She's always on the top of her game. So I want to make sure I'm matching that. And then like we landed there in this real space. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. Like there was such a pressure let
She's
off of
like
that.
me. We're
Yeah, like
both totally unkempt women.
we're both people. But I just think it's so interesting um how we can do that. And I think when we are leading, especially leading women, what does it mean to kind of show up as we are sometimes in those spaces, personally and professionally, to just set the pace for others to be able to be really true about what it's like to be where they are and who they are in that moment.
You asked me this question as I am like fully makeuped with like jewelry on. I just did this video thing. And so I'm like, it feels so funny. I know everyone can't see, but it's like talking about this while I'm in my like best element. But no, it's funny. I think as an entrepreneur, I have I don't want to say every entrepreneur feels comfortable doing that, but I think in some ways becoming an entrepreneur and running my own business has given me more freedom to take the lead and be that way. I think especially becoming a parent like the first time around, I kind of realized like trying to keep up appearances is going to hold me back. Like I just don't have the time for it. Like I don't have the time to be perfectly makeuped all the time. I am literally raising another human right now and trying to keep this business afloat and like priorities. But I think along the way, I also learned that, especially as women, I don't think we do ourselves a good service if we're always fully put together. And I know that kind of comes out a little bit weird, but it's like there's so much imposter syndrome in our space, and I feel it too. And there's so much like this person is inherently just more put together and better than me. And I think we need to talk a lot more about the human side of it all and the fact that we are all just working through it and nobody's perfect. And I think once you start doing that, I think it gives people a lot more agency to actually show up and produce and be and succeed in their careers because they're not worried about all these other little details. And so I like that, and I try to cultivate that in my team, and just with people I interact with. And I still feel that pressure all the time of like, oh, this person's wearing like a really beautiful dress. Like, I only buy my stuff at TJ Maxx. I'm never going to get like a custom, gorgeously tailored dress that I can take flowy Instagram photos with. But at the same time, like, that's power in itself to be able to say, hey, I'm still doing my thing and I'm doing it in a dress that costs $16.99 on the clearance rack. And that's okay, and that's who I am. And yeah, no, I think that that's super important. And then I'll stop talking. But also, as a parent of girls, I feel that that's very important. And I see my girls watching me and the decisions that I make. And even like, we have the makeup conversation a lot. Like, my daughter Nora will be like, Mommy, why are you putting makeup on? And I'm like, oh, why am I putting makeup on? It's like, it becomes like this I'm like, I'm putting it on because I think it's fun, and not because I feel like I need it, and not because I feel like it's making me into a better person. And I still am beautiful, but sometimes mommy just likes to put on makeup. Like, I literally just go through all these things in my head because I realize how implicitly we're sending these signals to other women that you have to look or act or be a certain way or hide some part of yourself in order to fit this like small definition of who is successful. And that's not true. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, no, you don't even have to say it. Don't apologize. But as you were saying that, I was thinking how curious it would be to ask your daughters like why they would love to put on makeup,
Yeah,
because they would probably be like, because it makes me so feel beautiful, or I love the bright colors, or
yeah.
I want to be like my mom,
They're
right?
not even thinking about it. Yeah,
Yeah, and I know because I have 3 daughters that I definitely am thinking about that, like, what's the, like, feminist stance I should be taking on everything, right? Which is a lot of
totally.
pressure, but I also really like, I do wanna be thinking about that, and then also
Yeah.
just trying to even think about their perspective of how they're absorbing something maybe isn't at the level that I think that they are at this point.
Yeah.
My oldest is probably starting to get there, but when they were littler,
Mm.
I wanted to be that like role model for them in thinking about it that way. But sometimes my middle daughter will be like, Mom, I just asked the question. I didn't need like the history of whatever it was. I was like, I'm
The
sorry. I
history of
just
feminism.
yeah, of anything.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
The
I
feminist
love it.
history of drive-throughs or whatever. I don't know. They're always just like, "Oh my gosh, mom, that's too much."
Oh, I overanalyze it all the time. But no, but I mean, like, to your point, I mean, it's we should be I don't mean to say that we should be like psychoanalyzing everything we do so that it's not misinterpreted incorrectly for somebody else. But I think it's also like, yeah, there are times when, you just want to look nice, and that's okay. It can be simple like that. But also, I think there is this like other level of power, I think, and not that power is the most important thing, but power in a good way, which is like, if I show up to a meeting, like I'm on a sales call and I have a baby on that call, it just, like, in a good way, just like changes so much. It says so many unsaid things. Like, number one, I believe babies should exist in an adult world. Number two, I am okay with you having your baby on this call if you need that. And now maybe your life is a little bit easier because you're not having to pretend that there's not a baby just off screen that you're kind of constantly trying to shush while you're trying to get your work done. Number three, it makes us all rethink the reality that all of us might have other things going on besides just work right now, whether we're parents, whether we're other caregivers. And so, like, I don't necessarily feel like we should all just be like blissfully, ourselves and like running rampant through the streets, being like, I am not going to subscribe to whatever rules, blah, 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 I do it my own way. But I think that there is some magic to kind of being like, I am putting myself in a position of vulnerability because I want you to feel safe putting yourself in a position of vulnerability, because we don't need to have these appearances in order to do great work. We can just do great work.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
my goodness. That's so good. And I think, I mean, I have so many friends that recently had children. So I've been, it's been interesting watching
mm,
that evolution for them, some of them first children. And then also because we're in this space where we do so much work online, it is very easy for that parenthood role to seep into our professional role, right? Because
yeah,
as I told you, I have a daughter who's homesick, so she could walk through the door at any
yeah,
moment. And if I were in my office, it's much easier to just keep those roles separated, but then you're not recognizing that those roles are also simultaneously happening because they're not happening in the same space. And so I
yeah,
do think this is an important
yeah.
transition in our like work, our experience, our existence as employees, because or as leaders, because these things are like the lines are blurring.
And
And I
it's a
think it's
lie to
really
suggest they're not. Yeah, it's a lie to suggest they're not. And I think even like the number of times, my husband and I are both working from home quite a bit, especially because the baby is so little. And, and my husband, I mean, he has a wonderful job and his team is great. But there are some times that he is on a call and he has to put on like a professional. I mean, me too, but I think less so than him. He'll have to put on a professional appearance, and it's like, and we're like tiptoeing around him, and like the baby makes noise and we're like, shh, 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 quiet. He's on this important call. And it's like, you think about that video that like went viral a few years ago of the guy doing like the CNN interview and like the kids come into the background. And I mean, it's all, yeah, it's not real. Like, right. You can't actually separate these things. You try so much, but sometimes a child just barges in and that's what it is. Um, and so I see my husband like on these calls, like kind of trying to keep up appearances. And I'm like, God, that's a lot of work. Like, it's just really, that's a lot of like stress and planning and organizing and making it all, and sometimes we have to do it. It's true. Sometimes we just have to be professional. But other times, if you don't have to be, it's like so freeing just to be like, well, I'm going to be nursing on this call. So just letting you're going to hear some weird noises. Like,
yeah.
and people love it. I don't know. It's just, and it's not just a parenting conversation. I think it's everything. Like, I think a lot about the messages that we send to each other in whatever we do, and especially when it's about elevating women who are historically underrepresented in business leadership. Well, a lot of that representation happens because of these barriers that we've created as a society that are keeping women down, that like, oh, it's not socially accepted to be breastfeeding in a meeting. So therefore, that's keeping a lot of women from being able to get to that table in the first place, And so it's like a little revolt in our own way of being like, no, you know what? I can actually actively do this and also run a business at the same time. And you can too. And we don't have to submit to these rules that have been set for us from decades ago, centuries
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah, thank you. Um, well, one of the other things that following you on LinkedIn, which is one of my very favorite places to follow you, because I love how you show up in that space like all the time. I'm just like, yes, I wish there was that icon on like a celebrate or
The
whatever.
yes icon.
Yeah, like that's like mic drop
Woo!
or whatever. I don't know. Like this is so
Love it.
important. But one of the things I was really inspired by was when you did find out that you were pregnant, and this was at this moment you were about ready to wrap up writing your book, and um like this huge shift happened, and you were so honest about grappling with like, what does this look like, what does this feel like? And I just was, again, I was so proud of you for bringing some of that emotional dissonance to the stage and being like, holy
Aw.
cow, like I'm on this wave that we were talking about earlier, right? All of these beautiful things were happening, all of these seeds that you had planted were like blooming, and there was that moment where you were like, what does this do to this garden, kind of, and you were sharing that, and I just wondered if you could talk to why you felt that was important to share.
Yeah, I think I have to say I love LinkedIn. I really do. I think it's such a great platform. Like, I think of all social platforms, LinkedIn is the one that feels the least algorithmy to me. It feels like And it allows you to tell stories more than I think other platforms do. This is my opinion. And the other thing I love about it is I feel like the impact is bigger because I'm talking to an industry. I'm not just, not that every starfish in the sea is very important, but also in the industry of travel in which I work, LinkedIn allows me to talk directly to the people in my professional network. And I feel like that's just like super impactful. So I love that. Um, I think one thing that LinkedIn struggles with sometimes is what a lot of social media platforms struggle with, which is the pressure to make everything look really polished and perfect. And I think other platforms struggle with it a lot more than LinkedIn does. I think, you look at like Instagram, it tends to still be like perfectly curated photos, and that's what it is. And but one thing that I think, and so I think on LinkedIn, it tends to sometimes be like, congratulations to me, I just got this award, or I got like this promotion, and that's good. But I do think that there is a level of conversation that happens on that platform more than other places, where people can really be like, tell their story. They have the time and the space to kind of write a longer story, to tell how they're feeling about something, and to have personal support from a professional network. I think, like, and for me, where my life is my job. And I don't mean that in like an obsessive way. I just mean that in like, I love my job. I created my job. I feel like my job is my calling. I feel like it's the thing I'm supposed to do. It's not just a job for me. Yes, do I practice work-life balance? Absolutely. I do my best to do that. But at the same time, like, this isn't something that I just turn off in my head. I'm always thinking about my job. And so for me, the personal and the professional intermingle a lot. And yeah, so I think I don't want to say like I like to be vulnerable on LinkedIn. That sounds a little bit weird, but like, I recognize that, like, to the point of what we were talking about before, everybody is a human, even if they're in a professional setting. And so sometimes I like to talk about the human side of things as they relate to the professional side of things. And and that was one of those things I just felt like telling a story about that day was, yeah, like, it, we were not planning on having three kids. We were very happy with our two daughters. I was super duper busy in my career. It was like, the feeling everybody had at the beginning of 2020 when COVID happened. I feel like everybody was like, oh, I was planning this really big trip, or like I had these big career moves. And then all of a sudden, and that's how I felt about finding out I was pregnant. I was like, I have this book coming out. 2024 is going to be like this amazing year. I'm going to do all this stuff. And then I was like, crap, I'm going to have a baby in 2024. And I am experienced enough as a parent to know that you can't just have a baby and then like move on and do other stuff. Like, this is going to interrupt your life. There is no doubt about it, for the rest of your life. And I was really upset. And ultimately my husband and I decided that, we were going to roll with it and go with the flow. But it was really challenging for me. And I had a lot of questions about, where was this going to take my career? Because I do feel like our careers, well, and that's science. That's not feeling. Like, data has shown that our careers as women are held back when we have children because of the society that we are in, and the barriers that are set up here. And I was just like, this was the time that I was supposed to be focusing on my career. And like, I finally was like, I'm ready and I can start traveling more and I can start doing this stuff more. And oh, now we're going to have a newborn. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really know if I can answer the question of like why I decided to share that story. I just felt like sharing that story was a great, I knew that other people have gone through this, I guess. And I love to tell stories. And I think through my experience, if I can help somebody to think differently about something, maybe an employer to think differently about something, or I can help somebody who's going through this experience to know that they're not alone and that other people are thinking through it. I guess it was really just that desire to share that message with the world, and to help other future parents, but also to kind of like call out society in some ways of what we've set each other up for and how that's not fair in a lot of ways that we're not all thinking about that or addressing that.
Yeah. I think that's what really resonated with me too, is just that, like, one, I don't think I'd seen someone just candidly address that moment, which is
Yeah.
both like joyous and then like just it's so life altering, right? And you have to
Yeah.
examine all the things. And I just really appreciated that, and
Mm.
to let that be a moment that we actually can acknowledge happens
Mm.
was really important to me in
Thanks.
seeing that.
Yeah.
And also even today, I think you were posting about this book tour, and just
Yeah.
questioning leaving your little guy home, and like
Yeah.
is this moment, is my presence and this moment worth the exchange of leaving him
Yeah.
home, and not not
Yeah.
to even necessarily consider that judgment, but like to share that you had this process that you were going
Yeah.
through, because again, I think it's something that so many women relate to.
Yeah.
And again, like you were saying, even people that maybe care for a parent or care for anybody else, like when your roles kind of collide, how do you know which role has the most heft in that moment, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's you're right. And yeah, I think even right, today's post, I just posted like today for everyone listening, and like as you very eloquently explained, I'm about to go on a book tour, and again, I was planning this book tour before I found out I was pregnant. Like this was gonna, and so then it came to this sort of realization of like, okay, I can push forward with my career, and be like, yeah, push forward, it's okay, you can do it. But then like there is this level of guilt of just like, oh, so you're prioritizing your career over like your son, and like that's kind of messed up, and I don't know, it's just, and like he's so young, and I think whenever I feel like strongly about something like that, my thinking is to write, and and I have started to think more and more. I think also be honestly becoming an author has done this for me too. It's like writing a book has taught me to see the way I process things outside of myself a little bit, and I'm like, wow, if I'm feeling this way, how many other people are feeling this way? Sorry, I just hit my microphone. How many other people are feeling this way? And and how can I help them, not being a guru, not knowing the answer, but just kind of sharing that I'm also going through it and illustrating it, and and like I think like naming it is like gives it gives it a little bit less power to kind of be like, wow, I'm really feeling really crappy about this and nobody really talks about it. But saying that and knowing that other people have gone through it, and hopefully giving somebody else the tools to recognize it and address it when they approach it like that, that's like my way of almost like fighting back to on these feelings. And yeah, and it's really hard, and I don't have a lot of the answers. And actually somebody said that to me about my book. They're like, "You don't really have a lot of answers in the book, but you do ask a lot of good questions." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Well, there you go. Like I don't have the keys to the universe. I don't know everything. But I'm going to tell you the nuances of what to think about and what's important to me and what I've noticed and who I've talked to." And I think that's what I do on LinkedIn too, is it's kind of like, do I have the answer? Is one actually better than the other? Should I still go on this book tour? I don't know. And you know what? It's possible I'm going to go on the book tour and I'm going to be like, that was a waste of my time. I cannot believe I did it. And I think we also have to remember the psychology of that in this moment before I've left on my tour, I don't know. Nobody can know. No one knows what's going to happen. And oftentimes we judge ourselves based on the outcome. Sorry, I keep hitting the mic because I'm like
It's
throwing my
okay.
hands in the air. We we judge ourselves based on the outcome. And this is like a scientific thing that people actually, like, if something ends well, they'll kind of be like, oh, that was a good choice. But like if it doesn't end well, they're like, oh, that was a crappy choice, even though the choice is the same. And the outcome might not have anything to do with what you've done. And I talk about that in like the context of solo travel, because people will say like, oh, if I go on this trip and I have this amazing time, it was a good decision. If I go on this trip and something happens to me, maybe I get hurt, it was a bad decision. But it's like, but the decision, that's not necessarily true. It's not, like you don't have control necessarily over if somebody passes you on the street or if they attack you, whatever it is. So like judging your decision based on what happens after, like in some ways, yes, you're right. Sometimes you discover if you are right or not about something. But other times it's like you can't judge yourself though. You can't be like, "Oh, that was stupid." Like how
Mhm.
could you have known in that moment? And so I think about that too of like, I'm going on this book tour. I don't know what it's going to be like. And I have to remember that I can't be mad at myself if it doesn't go the way I expected. I can't try to justify like, oh, I'm doing this, so this has to work out, because that also puts so much pressure on you to like, oh my gosh, what details am I working on? Who am I talking to? How much am I speaking about? There's so many different things that can change, and some in your control and some not in your control, that we really don't have control after we've made the decision so much, as much as we think we do anyway.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, so like that's kind of the space I'm in right now of just like, this has been decided. Hopefully it will go well. But if it doesn't go well, and not that I hope it doesn't go badly, but like
Yeah.
in the way that I'm expecting it to be, like whatever, worth the time, but also can we as a society, and we especially as women, not beat ourselves up about this stuff? And maybe like that's the message that I'm really trying to share, is that these things are hard, and talking about them builds awareness for other people to realize what's going on in our lives.
Yeah. As you were talking about some of that, and especially answering or asking questions and not having the answers, like I feel like that's some of our role, right? And on
Yeah.
your back to LinkedIn, this conversation is now sponsored by LinkedIn.
I know, right? Yeah, call LinkedIn after this.
Yeah. But on your profile, because it says that you're disrupting travel for women, right? And so when I think of the idea of disruption, it is often throwing those questions out there. Like just asking the question sometimes is the force of disruption that allows other people to come in and start to examine it, and then the solutions come, right? But you do have to ask the questions first, and I think some of us are really good at just seeing the spaces where we need to be questioning what structures exist, and
Hmm.
like that's what we can do all day long, and then we do have to stand there without the answers, which is sometimes a little bit more vulnerable than we want it to be. But I think it's really important to just own that space of that being the thing that we are good at, and I think it's a really important thing to have people doing in the world today.
I think that's really great insight.
Yeah.
I'm going to hold that close to me of like, that's right. I don't need to have the answers. My job is raising the question.
Yeah,
But no, but you're right. And, and I think there is a lot of pressure to know the answer. I think we live in a society that really, you're supposed to have an opinion about everything. And I remember years ago, I was sitting with a content creator whose name escapes me, but he's a very talented person. And he had said he was not American. And he said to me, he was like, there is so much power in the phrase, "I don't know." And he was like, and I think about that a lot, like this phrase, "I don't know," and how important it is. And I think we are so pressured to to have an opinion about everything. And a lot of times the best thing that you can do is actually not have an opinion, because that means that you have, it could mean that you haven't thought about it at all, but it could also mean that you've thought about it a lot and you have evaluated all of the sides, and you have still come to no conclusion. And that means that you're thoughtful. It means that you're considerate. It means that you're empathetic, even. And I think that that's really important, because especially on social media, even nowadays, it's like you're supposed to stand up for something. You're supposed to say something. And standing up for something is really important, yes. But also, you shouldn't stand up for something like really fast because everyone's telling you to do it, even if you don't know anything about it. So I think it's okay to be in a space where you're saying, I am still collecting data, or I'm considering all sides, or I understand all sides, or I don't understand all sides. And that's why I want to learn more. And I don't know. And so So I think that's what I spend a lot of time doing, is saying like, I'm not going to tell you what the answer is because I don't know what the answer is. The answer is very complicated, but let me explain to you what is happening and why this answer is actually not as easy as you think and as straightforward as you think, because maybe we haven't thought through that part yet. And yeah, I do think that that's really important.
Yeah. Well, I have one more non-book related question, and then I do want to make sure we actually talk about the book, which is why we're here today, or at least it's an excuse for us to be here today.
Sure.
And I mentioned that we're recording this episode a day before International Women's Day. So this is a great timing for us, but also this is a moment when we kind of feel the weight of this week and this month. And as I
Mm,
mentioned, being women that are really focusing on creating spaces for women and gender equity, like we can feel a huge struggle with how to show up right now. And I feel like I've read posts that, that you have kind of wrestled with this as well. And for me right now, I'm coming off of a year of having some kind of weird health issues. And then last month, I had like everything that my kids decided to bring home from the petri dish of school. And all of a sudden it's February or it's March, and it's time to be doing all these things that we need to do to get the word out for International Women's
yeah.
Day, for Women's History Month. And I just was thinking, like, how much does it honor what I'm trying to say to be giving 110% right now and speaking as loud as possible, because this is when people are primed to listen. And how much does that kind of support the actual need to have a month where we're focusing on the fact that women's voices need to be heard? And I wrestle with this for Black History Month. I wrestle with
Yeah.
this for every space. Like, I feel like if we are who we say we are, we're actually doing this all of the time, right? And
Mm-hmm.
again, back to LinkedIn, you just made a great post about this, about like what we can be doing 12 months of the
Mm,
year. But I wanted to talk to you, how do you kind of wrap yourself around this struggle, because I'm sure you feel it too. Like
yeah.
there's such a again, like an emotional dissonance here of like what's the right thing to do in this space.
It's such an interesting paradox, I think, that like Women's History Month is the time when we are putting the most strain on the shoulders of women. Same with Black History Month, as you're saying, like that is the time when we're expecting the most like mental and emotional labor from Black people. Like, I think that is a challenge. And on the one hand, you're trying to speak out at a time when people are listening. And I think that's at the end of the day kind of like my primary thought. I actually we, to be totally honest with you, we rescheduled, and I put this in my post, we rescheduled the book launch to March because of Women's History Month. It was originally January. The publisher moved it to April when she found out I was pregnant, and they were like, we're going to give you 3 months. And then I said, no, let's push it back to March because March is Women's History Month, and March is when people are listening and they're looking for opportunities to talk about women, and the book will give them an opportunity to do that. So like I absolutely like used the system because, like it or not, in March, people are reaching out and they're like, oh, yeah, women. Huh. We don't have an article about that. Crap. Where should we go? And like they're looking for stuff. So I think on the one hand, it is great to take that energy. It's great that there is energy. Like that's lovely. But I think on the other hand, it puts so much work onto the shoulders of women who are like, okay, this is the one time of year everybody's listening to me. So what do I have to say? What's like my big thing? What's the important thing that I need to say right now in this moment? Because I'm not going to have another moment. And so the post that I had posted was, yeah, it was kind of like, I don't think, and again, this is all personal opinion. I don't think I know some people are like, oh, forget these like Women History Month. That's stupid because we should be celebrating women all year. I agree. But I also think that we're just busy people that forget a lot of stuff and we're fickle and we just forget. And I think if we, instead of being like, this is my month to talk about women, maybe we make it more internal. We think like, okay, this is my month to consider what am I doing for women? Like, this is my month to think about it. I'm going to give myself the month to reflect on it. Throughout the rest of the year, I'm going to implement those things. but this is my time to like to measure up, and to be like, how many women have I hired? What's the diversity of the women on my, C-suite? How many women am I amplifying in my work? Am I going to women-owned businesses, et cetera? Like if everyone could just take, 10 minutes to think about that and then map out a plan for the rest of the year. Okay, this is my hiring plan for women going forward. This is how I'm going to, buy for more women. Like these are the articles I'm going to read, whatever. I'm going to follow like 100 women so that my feed has more women in it from now on social. Whatever it is, like I think that would be great. Can we have like reminder moments, but then let's make sure we're carrying it on through the year. So, I do think that as advocates, we are opting in some ways, and just like I am saying, hey, I'm here to talk about women. So I realize that during Women's History Month, I'm going to get a little bit busier. That's okay with me. That's part of my job. But I want to make sure that we're really thinking this through, and it's not just, I don't want to say performative. I feel like that word is actually overused sometimes now, but like not performative in the sense of not just being like, let's check the box of do the women's thing and move on. Let's use this as a minute to all check in and say, what are we actually doing all year long for women, so that March is our reflection time, but the whole year is the time that we're implementing and executing.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So I'm using my mic drop icon again. Thank you. I love
Mic drop icon.
that. Okay. So now I do really want to spend some time talking about your book. And I wanted to just hear from you a little bit about why personally did you want to write it? And then who is it for? And what did you want the readers to be able to take away from the book when they were reading it?
Yeah. This question is a lot harder than it should be. I don't know why. I'm like, why did I want to write the book? I don't know. I just started writing it. It's like my LinkedIn post. I just start writing it. I think, you know, the book itself has evolved. When I first started writing it, I was looking to write like a solo travel guide for women. It was going to be a lot more tactical. Um, you know, what to pack, et cetera, et cetera. The more I started writing, the more I started seeing myself talking about issues that I thought were important. Um, when I first started traveling alone, I was 20 and I studied abroad in Portugal. And I found myself so um, hit on the side of the head with the fact that women's experiences abroad really do change based on where we go. And I was confronted with like a different like gender norm, for example, even in Portugal, which now is like, for me, it's like going to New Jersey. But then for before it was like, it felt so different, like really, really different. That was like really my first time. And when you're alone, you feel those things even more strongly because you don't have the buffer of somebody else, or you're not like having the cultural comfort. You really are like immersing yourself and getting very vulnerable. And I had a lot of culture shock, and nobody had prepared me for that. I think we kind of maybe talked a little bit about like what to expect on your trip, but it was more like what to expect on your trip versus what to expect on this life-changing experience that was going to make you question everything about yourself, and how were you going to go through that, and like those are two very different things. And so as I wrote the book, I realized more and more that I was talking a lot more to the person who was preparing for her trip about the things that she didn't know, about the unknown unknowns of what it was going to feel like, realizing that you are being, maybe you look really different from the people who are local, and how it's going to feel to get that kind of attention, for example, or to be confronted with, a certain way that you're talked to or looked at or treated, or even the way you feel when you come home and you realize that like you feel really different, but you don't really know how to explain that, and the very complicated feelings that come from that, and all of those things. And so then when I got an agent, which was amazing, and we found a publisher who was a solo traveler herself. My editor was a experienced solo traveler herself, and so she just like ate up the concept. But it was interesting because she was the one who sort of said to me, she's like, I actually think this is more of a self-help book than like a travel guide. And from there, that's where it evolved. And I think the book is in like, I think if you go to a bookstore, it's in like general travel under like travel guides. Like it's still in like the travel guide section because there's not a travel self-help section. But if there were, this would be in it because it is so much more about like the internal things that we struggle with and also the external forces that make us feel those internal things. Like, how does our media talk about women in travel? What are the messages that we're telling women right now? And how is that skewing the expectations that we have going in? And how can we push back on them? So yeah, I think it's really like evolved in its own way to become this like beautiful thing that I'm really honestly like really, really proud of. And I hope that it helps people way more than just being like, here's the 5 things you can pack and here's how to create a capsule wardrobe. Like those things are important, but that information is out there. You can find that information easily. That's a Google search. You don't need a book for that anymore, you know? And so this is more like how to address that feeling of realizing that everything you knew is actually very specific to where you're from. And there's infinite other ways to do and be and live that you haven't even considered before. And like that's this book.
Yeah, it's so good. It's like your girlfriend's guide to like actually being
Yeah,
a traveler, not
it's like yes, exactly. It's like the sit down conversation that like everybody's parent or loved one or aunt or whatever should have with them. That's the book I wanted to write. The book that somebody buys for you when you're about to go on a trip and they say, I cannot even begin to have this conversation with you, but this book will. And read
yeah.
it and it will help you. That's what I wanted.
Yeah, I think it's so beautiful because I think that is something that so many of us need. And it takes a long time to be able to find the language to speak about experiences or to even ask the questions that you want to ask because it takes some time to understand what you're seeing and witnessing. And I think probably for you and for me, even those things that we were seeing and feeling early on in travel, there literally wasn't language for yet, so we actually have an
Yeah.
opportunity to put the language and the shape of things for travelers before they start traveling because we didn't know that there was, like a power dynamic in travel. Like that's something that we probably felt, right? But we would have never known how to come back and say, this is what I witnessed. And I'm not sure that that's what I want to be a part of, or I want to be a part of making that not feel that way for other travelers. But there wasn't just a way to speak about it. And I think it's really important to maybe send travelers armed with that knowledge to be able to process those experiences as you move through the world because we often think about travel being this superficial exchange, or like that Instagram version of travel is this
Yeah.
very kind of selectively curated experiences. But when you get out there, you're like, wait a second, I don't see like that perfect waterfall and this whatever beach, but I am feeling all these other things and I don't know how to be this traveler. And,
Yeah.
and I think that space is important.
That was very eloquently said. And you're right. And a lot of these things were not things we even talked about. We didn't even know about them. A lot of these things didn't even exist. There's like a whole chapter that talks about social media and it talks about the expectations we have because of social media and how that affects us. And, you know, social media blissfully did not exist as much as it does today when I first started traveling alone. And you know, now thinking about how those narratives are shaping us and our expectations and what our travel industry, who our travel industry is talking to and what they look like and who's representing them. I mean, all of that gets really complicated and I think it's just continuing to evolve. So there's like things that have existed forever that we've just never had the language for. And then there's new things that didn't exist forever that we're having to reconcile. And you know, it's only going to get even more more complicated from there, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think is great, right? Again, for that like disruptor persona, that complication is actually leading us to this thing that we look forward to experiencing at some point in our lifetimes that
Yeah.
feels the way that we wish that we felt, I guess. Like it starts to
Yeah.
match up. um Well, before we end our conversation, I have three more things, three more of your hats that I just really wanted to quickly tap into, and then I have our rapid fire questions. But the one is your 85% podcast, which I know you've been, working on over the past few years, and then World Herstory, which is another exciting project. And then for local people in your area or people traveling, the Ula Cafe, which my very
Yeah.
favorite thing is just seeing the description, a social justice and community minded cafe and community space. I was like, of course, that's like if Beth had a cafe, that is what it is. So I just want you to be able to kind of talk quickly about each of those things for our listeners to know about.
Yeah, so thank you. So 85% is a podcast that I started last year. I actually just got my like little notification that you started it like a year ago. Apparently started a year ago on March 1st. I was like, wow, that's really exciting. It's I interview trailblazing women in travel and I hear their stories. And the 85% refers to the fact that 85% of travel decisions are made by women, which is astounding when we consider that women are not represented at all in the travel industry. I think they're like 8% of senior leadership in travel. They're like not, not in a lot of the imagery. Now there's more women in travel imagery, but it's still a very, very narrow type of woman. It's like a very young, skinny, straight woman usually. And so 85% is like, let's talk to women who are like leading the charge and, changing up travel and making it better for all of us. And let's hear their stories. That's the podcast, 85%, the 85% podcast.com. And World Herstory is my favorite current project. It is the youngest of the projects. It still is in the development phase, but being a creator, just like by nature, that's just what I do. Not a creator in the sense of like being a social content creator, which I am, but like really just being like creatively driven. It's like I always, for some reason, I just like run my own race sometimes, and I'm like, there's not a TV show. I'm gonna make one. Like, do you have TV experience? Absolutely not. But I have a clear idea of what I want to do, and I'm gonna do it. And that's what happened with World Herstory. Is we were in Puerto Rico for our creator summit that we run on behalf of Wanderful. And I was like, we've got this amazing woman run video team. And, what would happen if I were to just reserve their time for like 2 days and just record the TV show that I've always wanted to have? And that TV show is a show that chronicles travel through the eyes of women. So we just created the pilot episode, and it's me in Puerto Rico eating, and it's fun, it's a travel show, so I'm like eating and like experiencing things, but like I'm only going to like women-owned businesses, and I'm telling a story, and the story for Puerto Rico is all about food sovereignty and about the women who are sort of reclaiming power through food. And we're currently like figuring out what our next step is, like looking for a distributor, collecting data on if people think we should just like create a YouTube channel or if we should like actually go to a Netflix. There's like a few different routes for this, but I'm really, really excited about it. And then Ula is, yeah, that's like my physical manifestation of all this. I think everything else is so digital. I like run everything from home or, on my travels. Um, Ula is the local cafe that has existed in our neighborhood since 2007. So it's been around for a while. And in 2021, it went up for sale. And my husband and I, who have absolutely zero experience in hospitality and didn't even know how to make a cappuccino, and still arguably don't really know how to make a good cappuccino, um, decided to buy it. We saw a good investment opportunity. We saw a good way to be involved in our community. We saw something that looks kind of fun. It's been a ton of work, but it's also really cool. We could have a whole episode talking about that, because that is like one of the oldest businesses there is, right? Just like food and respite for the weary. Like that's what this business is, and it is like the physical in-person community that I think a lot of times in a digital world now we really crave. And it's been so fun to just like be a beacon of gathering. And that's not something we created. We like, we came into it as owners, but hopefully we're still cultivating it. And yeah, and we'd love for anyone to come by. We do like breakfast and lunch and pastries and coffee and all the good stuff. And a little side of community. We like support local artists and we try to give back as much as we can to initiatives that are important to us. And yeah, I think you see that when you walk into the cafe for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad that we could speak to each of those as well. Okay, so we're gonna jump into the rapid fires. You probably have done this with me once before, but it's probably been long enough
Yes.
that neither of us, I don't know, remember
Oh, I'm
remember the
terrible at these.
answers. They
Can't
might be
wait.
different answers. The first is, what are you reading right now?
I'm reading this great book. It's called The Unsettlers, and it's all about people who have given up on like modern society and they're just like, I want to go back to the land and be homesteaders and not use a lot of electricity and make my own food and like give like a big fu to like industrialization. And it's fascinating. I am like really, really enjoying it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that sounds so good and probably really dangerous for me to read.
Yes,
And then
me too.
like hearing about how Beth and Christine moved off the grid and they're like
Oh my
creating this
gosh.
community for
I
who
am
knows
like
what.
5 seconds away. I'm just like, Marvin, my husband, I'm like, let's buy the house next door and like knock it down and build like a giant urban farm and have like an apple orchard. And he's like, you are crazy.
Oh goodness. Well, I feel like that could be a whole nother conversation about the people that stand beside us when we are the people that are like doing all these things. But okay, the next question. What is always in your suitcase or backpack when you travel?
Oh, my journal. I always bring my travel journal. I always have things, even if I don't write in it, which sometimes I don't, often I don't. But it's just a paper, just a good old paper journal. Now it's one of those 5 year ones where like you write like one line a day and then you get to see like what you wrote 5 years ago, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, I bought one of those for my daughter and I didn't know if she would do it, but she's about 3 years in. And I think it'll be so
Oh,
interesting to see from like 10 to 15. Like she's gonna change. Like that's
oh
such
my
a
God, that's so
interesting
cool. That's such a good
phase
idea.
of life to reflect on because it's not,
Yeah.
I think, not something that we usually hang on to like that. So
Yeah. I love that.
okay, to sojourn is to travel somewhere as if you live there for a short while. Where would you still love to sojourn?
Travels for a short while. I would love to. I've okay, rapid fire. The first thing that comes into my head is Italy. I would like give anything to live in Italy for like a moment. My family's also, I'm also part Italian. I don't talk about that a lot because I don't know a lot about my Italian side. Um, but that would be fun. I would just like I would like do the I would totally do the under the Tuscan sun thing and just like get an old house and like, make my own wine and just like be like living in rural Italy.
Yeah. My girls and I spent like 2 weeks in southern Italy this last summer, last fall, and oh my gosh, just yes, I could second that as well. And just driving through and looking at these houses and these estates that are like time capsules and just it was just
uh,
incredible. So I agree. I think that could be really a great experience. Maybe that's where you do the
oh my gosh. Are
homes
we
this
like, I was going to say the homesteading. Are
yes.
Beth and Christine going to move to the Italian countryside and like
Yeah.
be like whatever, like wine and olive producers and that's
Yeah.
it? Because that's what it
Yeah.
sounds like it's about
Yeah.
to
Wait
happen.
for the book about that.
Wait for the book. Yes. Love.
Okay. What do you eat that immediately connects you to a place that you've been?
When I feel like really just like gray, just like not even down on myself, but just like disconnected from my life, I make this Portuguese kale soup called caldo verde, and it's like the most traditional Portuguese soup. And I actually learned it from my aunt who passed away a few years ago. I learned like her recipe. And so it's like the one thing that I can make and eat. And it's not the one thing I can make, but like in this context, it's one thing I can make and eat and like feel like she's like next to me because I'm like tasting the taste that I remember when she was alive. And
Mm,
that like really grounds me and feels really good.
yeah, thank you. Who was a person that inspired or encouraged you to set out and travel the world?
Oh, my grandma. My grandma Margaret, who passed away in 2019, is Wonderful used to be called Go Girl. And I always called her the OGG, the original Go Girl, because that woman traveled. She met her husband in her 30s on a ship. She was a nurse and she was on a ship to Saudi Arabia. And and again, like this is my grandma, right? So her in her 30s, that was like 1950. Like she's like traveling on her own to Saudi Arabia, ends up meeting her husband. They have 8 kids, like very late in life for somebody in the 50s, and traveled her whole life and traveled up until the year she died. She's traveled. So that was like she set such an example for me about that. And I've always kept that close to me.
Mm. I at some point need to put a collection of Soul of Travel guest grandma's stories together because they are so many of
Oh
them
my
are the women
gosh.
that have like set us on this path. So that's so great. If you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
Um, I remember what I said the last time. I said Maya Angelou because I like the way that she looks at the world. My second thought was Moana, but I actually feel like she would be very aggravating to travel with. So I'd be like, girl, you are making bad choices right now. Don't do that. Um, I think that Michelle Obama would be very fun to travel with. So let's go with her right now. I would totally. We'll do some urban farm hunting with Michelle Obama.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think she'd be up for it as well. She seems
Yeah.
like she'd be in for the off-grid gardening too.
Yeah.
Okay, the last question is probably the hardest one for you, but who is one woman in the travel industry you admire and would love to recognize in this space?
Oh, that is really, really hard. There's so many that are really doing great work. I think somebody who has always been like a beacon for me is Lola Akinmade, which I'm sure she's been called out on this before, like many times. But the reason I want to call her out this time is because she has really carved an amazing niche for herself. And she's like a fellow creator in the way that I see myself as a creator, like author, photographer, entrepreneur, does all these things. But she is so genuine and she still really genuinely makes time for others. She was actually the first person to leave me like an Amazon review when my book came out. And I was just like, that I know it's like such a little thing, but it's just like for somebody so busy, for them to like take that time and be like, yeah, I'm going to write an Amazon review or whatever. Like it just says so much about like your character. And she spends so much time lifting other people up. And I think it's worth recognizing that just listening and hearing people is like everything.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Such a beautiful space to end the conversation on. And I agree. And also, I think she's coming with us and Michelle on this grand adventure
Yeah.
because why not? If we're building the dream, like let's just build it
Yes.
big.
That would be
Um,
fun.
I think she'd come. So also that's the great thing about that. Well, Beth, thank you so much for being here. I know we could have probably gone on for another hour with all of these things, but I really appreciate your time. I treasure being adjacent to you in this space, in this industry right now. And I can't wait to see you in person soon in Salt Lake City for
Yes.
WITS. And yeah, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your book. And we'll leave all of the notes where people can find Wonder Woman, which is available now.
Thank you, Christine. My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.